collections of poetry and organized numerous cultural events for promoting Romanian literature. She is currently a board member of Pen Club Romanians. Next to me is Professor Nenad Markovikj, tenured professor at the Political Science Department of Law Faculty, Justinianus Primus, in Skopje. He is one of the founders of one of the bigger think tanks in North Macedonia, the Institute for Democracy, Societas Civilis Skopje, and an associate researcher of the Prespa Institute. He is a member of the editorial board of the biannual political journal Political Thought, published by the Institute for Democracy and the Konrad Adenauer Foundation in Skopje. Professor Markovikj is a former president of the Macedonian Political Science Association and one of the founders of the Balkan Political Science Association. He is currently a member of the Security Council of the Republic of North Macedonia. And last but not least, Ognyan Georgiev, a long-time journalist covering international relations, EU enlargement, local authorities, corruption. Also part of the editorial team of the leading Bulgarian business publication Capital, and currently head of its local division Capital Plovdiv, as well as the English language service Insights. And also he was covering Bulgarian-Russian relations back in 2000s up until Putin was re-elected in 2012. He's also studying urban migration, demographics, and also Fulbright Fellow from the Department of Urban Studies and Planning. My name is Marija Mandić. I work at the Senior Research Assistant at the Institute for Philosophy and Social Theory. So, let us begin. The colonial perspective requires a broader canon of thought and would require taking seriously the epistemic insights from critical thinkers from the periphery and semi-periphery. How can a critical broader thinking and the local term that envisage a transmodern world move us beyond Balkanistic discourses, Eurocentrism, and soft power discourses? Is the outsider view necessarily superior or inferior to the insider's view? Is the insider connected with the truth because of the existential intimacy with the object of study? What can be Westplaining with regard to the Balkans? And can we measure and predict the factors that constitute the peace in the region? We will start with the name, Balkans, because we believe that naming is the first step to acquire control over an unknown concept. So, are we the Balkans, or just the Western Balkans, or Southeast Europe? What can we tell when thinking about this political, relational, and shrinking term, the Western Balkans? What do you think about these naming strategies applied to this part of Europe? So, everyone who wants.
Okay, so dobro jutro, good morning everyone. I'm really happy and honored to be here. First of all, labeling, right, naming is one of the manifestations of power, and in the Foucaultian understanding, the moment you name something, you define it, and also you owe it, right? Of course, we don't have to take things literally in the case of the Western Balkans, but starting with Larry Wolff about inventing Eastern Europe, and continuing with Marija Todorova, and most recent local, let's say, researchers have shown how in history the term Balkan was an invented, partially invented concept that used a geographical label, of course, and infused it with a lot of geopolitical elements. So that means that Balkan, the word Balkans have meant beyond the original Turkish reference, right, meaning the land of blood and honey. It meant different things in different contexts, right? So it's extremely context bound. And the same, I would say, happened to its understanding after the war ended, the dissolution of Yugoslavia ended. So the first moment that we have it, let's say, registered with the concept of Western Balkans is in 2001, immediately after the war in Kosovo, during the European Council of under Austria's presidency. So that was the first moment when they were preparing for the Thessaloniki agenda, where they would announce the opening of with the European perspective, future membership of the countries in the Western Balkans. But what was at that time Western Balkans is very different to what is today in 2023 Western Balkans, right? So this also meant that this was an EU-driven concept. So the European Union tried to position itself politically as a peace builder and as a future, let's say, center of power that gives meaning to certain words, right? So one of the problems that we encountered is that Balkanism, the concept developed by Todorova, showing also the negative traits and the stigma embedded by the concept based on biases, cultural biases of the West, has been also embedded in the term Western Balkans. So even though it tried to be hygienized, if I could say so symbolically, in the context of the EU integration process, it is still, it became still, it was ingrained with stigma. And how do we observe that? Well, it's very easy to see whenever EU representatives discuss outside of their mandate, outside of their speeches that are written by, of course, some experts in communication. And these experts in communication, maybe they have also read Todorova or Foucault, and they're very careful with their words. But when they have to, let's say, speak freely, then we could definitely observe how biases pop up. And usually you don't observe that only in political representatives. You also observe that in Western academia, writing on Western Balkans. I mean, if you just look on Google Scholars, some of the most quoted academic articles belong to Western researchers on Bosnia or Kosovo or the region, and less to local researchers. Of course, the situation has changed. Now there's more and more, let's say, attempts of epistemic equality, if we can call it like that. But yesterday we discussed about who actually is labeling, who is heard, who has the political space to work with labels. And from this point of view, I would mark a positive aspect, and that is that the European Union became aware of the stigma in the concept and also the confusion that the idea of Western Balkans creates, because it has nothing to do with actually with geography. So they preferred and they switched to the term Southeast Europe, that they considered a bit neutral. But trying to do so, this embedded also an action of admitting that the term balance is a stigma. On one hand, I would believe that this is a result of the huge critical input and critical thinking that has come from the region in the last years. On the same time, in the EU jargon, the word is still used with this attempt maybe to neutralize it and to say, yeah, but this is just a label to refer to certain countries. It has nothing, stereotypical about it. So for the moment, I would just stop here, and then I would like to maybe contradict some of the colleagues.
Does anyone want to add something? Does it?
Good morning, everyone. I consider all of you die-hard fans. Whoever shows up Tuesday night, I never forget you. So thank you for coming. I also insisted to sit here. I feel like Johnny Cash on this. I just need to start. So I kind of agree with Miruna. I think for me at least, it's quite clear that we live in the Balkans, right? So always have, always will, right? So this term Western Balkans, although you said that now there is a kind of trying to shift away from it, it's so ingrained now here. I think it would take a long time actually to kind of get rid of it with all its positive and negative consequences. But I just wanted to add, I think the point was we are Western Balkans, just to have this Western in the name, because Western signifies something that is modern, something that is progressive, right? I'm yet to encounter a person who comes from the Eastern Balkans. I'm sure you don't come from Eastern Balkans, right? Although, if you look at it like that, right, you should be coming from Eastern Balkans. So I think the whole point of rebranding was actually to connect the other part of our panel is to Westernize it. And then when you Westernize it, then somehow it's actually better. And I think that was
probably the kind of the mistake in the first place. And then because it's politically coined term, you always see the problem with it, right? So always the big problem is Croatia, Western Balkans, right? Whenever we put them there, our colleagues for Croatia, we say, no, we are not Western Balkans. We joined EU 10 years ago. So joining EU meaning that you go from one camp to another. So it's kind of, for me, it's rather useless concepts. 2 days ago, I got rejected paper, and then I got one of the reviewers said that I'm using word Balkans, but I'm actually writing about Western Balkans. So I think there is a lot of confusion. So for me, I just want to add, I kind of agree, but I think we live in the Balkans, and that's pretty much it. So I'm in Southeast Europe also. We've been to Southeast Europe, so we went to West Balkans, now we're going back to Southeast Europe. I'm not sure that they're solving any issues.
Naming. Okay, so there has been much discussion in post-colonial theories about general crisis of representation. Edward Said came with his Orientalism in 1979, Marija Todorova with Imagining the Balkans in 1997. Todorova argued that the stereotypical Western gaze towards the Balkans is different from Orientalism, insofar as its in-betweenness of the Balkans and transitionary character is constructed not as other, but as incomplete self. Balkanistic discourse and Balkanism have developed gradually in the course of 2 centuries and crystallized in specific discourses around Balkan Wars and World War I. Balkanization is not only had come to denote the parcelization of large political units, and also became a synonym for revision of to tribal, backward, primitive, and barbarian. However, Todorova argues that in opposition to Dorian, the Balkans did not have a real colonial experience. In that, the Balkans also differ from Africa or Latin America. However, colonialism and post-colonialism are historical phenomena, while global coloniality refers to the modern global power and knowledge matrix that we are currently living in. So, I'm interested, what do you think, how coloniality applies to the Balkans today? Or does it apply?
Did you want to? Okay. In no specific order. So, before I turn to coloniality, there is one huge objection I want to make to the general framing, I would say, of the whole debate. And one specific term, I think Westplaining is a very bad term because it's a derivative of one even worse term, which is mansplaining. And it's introducing terms like this are usually an effort to cure flu with rabies, basically. So basically, I don't like this kind of label terms that are way too much, because I'm probably the only one that's not center-left in this room. It's more to the political center. I always declared myself as a liberal, although I do teach political philosophy. I'm very acquainted with Todorova and Said. And in this regard, in regards to the first debate, I just wanted to add something. I wanted to add the same point that Nemanja made. At least in the Western Balkans, there is the determination West. There is this, if we go by the logic, no man is Toman, and Southeast Europe sounds more sanitary, but it's but it's still the South. And South is somehow in this European perception always bad and less developed and whatnot. The main differentiation, when we speak about Orientalism versus Balkanism, we forget one other determination, which is very important. And Todorova says it somewhere in between the lines, and have reread her book for quite a while. But she says that the main difference is that Orientalism has in itself this feminine aspect. When you say Orientalism, you think about certain feminine aspects. And Balkanism is a very rude masculine concept, which is, yeah, as you said, not completely finished, lacks something. But at least from the perspective of a person that lives in North Macedonia, we're not confused, Nemanja, where we are. I think we have no identity crisis in this regard, unlike Croatia and Slovenia, for instance. We are in the middle of the Balkans. We belong there for better or for worse. Sometimes this reference, Balkan, is taken as, it's a very, I would say, schizophrenic reference. It's a rather schizophrenic reference. On one hand, we're very proud. Exactly, maybe this culture of masculinity has something to do with it, but also food, also folklore, also being tough, I don't think we are that tough. I think we have a bit of a higher opinion on ourselves than we really deserve. But still, there is this general stereotype of liking to be in the Balkans. Then again, you feel the Balkans are somewhat of a tight skin, somewhat of a tight shirt, where you cannot get out from this framework of corruption, inefficient public services, more corruption, and then probably a political discourse. And that's my final point in this first intervention, which is purely ethnic. If, you know, there is this saying, you can call me whatever you want, call me a saucepan, just don't break me. You know, this is a saying in Serbian, in Macedonian, probably in Bulgarian as well, with different versions of it. So I don't think that the naming is as determinative as the content of what of this particularization, breaking up into smaller groups, tribalization. And if you see how political processes, especially you can take the examples of North Macedonia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and now Kosovo, you will see that the more the country is heterogeneous in religious and ethnic terms, the less successful it is. And this is our reality. Let me tell you something about the political development of North Macedonia, which used to be the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, which used to be the Republic of Macedonia, which used to be the Socialist Republic of Macedonia. We changed 4 names. So if we stick to this philosophy that no man is Toman, we would be highly confused by now, but we are trying to remain sane. What the political process proved, that at the end, there are 2 concepts that collide. There is this Balkanism concept, which is ethnic tribalization, particularization, closing within these ethnic groups, which goes beyond the concept of ethnic rights. It always goes beyond the concept of ethnic rights. It's very subtly and delicately masked under the concept of ethnic rights, but in its essence, it functions as ethno-corporativism. We started with a constitution in 1991, and Badanter's commission said only the Slovenian and the Macedonian constitution fulfill the full criteria so they can become independent states because they guarantee minority rights. And this was not enough. And okay, I admit, it was not good. Relation towards minorities was not fair. It was systemically wrong in many aspects. But as the country developed, and Kosovo happened in 1999, the conflict in Macedonia happened in 2001, then the Ohrid Framework Agreement introduced certain balance between the so-called integrativist model of Horowitz and the model of Liebhardt of consensual democracy, some kind of a balance. It's a better balance than the Dayton Agreement, because the international community did not repeat one big mistake that made in Bosnia. Although I admit, the level of conflict was completely different. You cannot compare the 6-month conflict in Macedonia with the war in Bosnia. It's incomparable. But still, the mistake that was made in Bosnia was that they federalized the state. Once you raise the borders, you will never put them down. It's a definitive process. And this process of particularization, tribalization, separation, everybody in their own, as we say, tor. I don't know what's the adequate translation of tor. It's the place where you keep the sheep, basically, from your own flock. Please help me with the English translation if anybody knows. Sorry?
Corral.
Corral, yeah, okay. Never heard of it. Okay. I learn something new every day. So the corral, yeah, the tor, basically, was legitimized in Bosnia. You are on your side of the border and we are on the... In Macedonia, back then the Republic of Macedonia, or the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, if you prefer, the political process was put down on local level. So local self-government was the better concept than dividing the country. Because people figured out, the international community finally figured out that you should solve the problems where they become problems. Never centralize them. As soon as you centralize them, they become bigger problems. So just solve the problems where they appear on the local level where real democracy happens. And this was a big lesson for what should be done now probably with Zajednica Srpskih opština in Kosovo, and the Ohrid model is widely referred to as the better model out of the 2. But then again, the Ohrid Framework Agreement did not stop in introducing ethno-corporativism in the country. It's still a highly ethno-corporativistic country where political elites, I think that the Social Democrats tried to impose one society for all model, and it was not completely successful because they didn't have any kind of partner from the Albanian side of the parties. Why? Because usually minority parties or parties that belong to other groups that are not majority groups usually rely on ethno-corporativism. That's how they mobilize, and they will never give up the process, which tells you that the essence of the political process is in fact Balkanization. At the end, the essence is Everybody belongs to their own group. Every bird flies with its own flock, and our relations are more collectivistic than individual. And this pretty much reflects, I said I'm a liberal, I'm sorry for using inappropriate terms, some of you might not like them, but for me that lack of individualism is a huge problem in society. You know, there is this bad and good individualism, atomistic and collectivistic individualism, and ours is not collectivistic individualism. It doesn't contribute. Ours is atomistic individualism, and when we introduce collectivism, it's on levels of the group. So we don't have any personal relations, we have collectivistic relations. And it turns out that this balkanization process is just gaining ground and speed. It's not really slowing down. I don't know where will it go. I don't know whether it will, it's reversible at all. I'm not sure. But it is so, in terms of the content of what Balkanism is, it turns out that several of the countries completely fulfilled the criteria to be called Balkan countries. As I will finish with what I began. At least we are not confused about it. We are sure that we are there. And there is nowhere to run. But how we understand, how we self-perceive, that's another story for maybe the second intervention.
Would you like to add something?
Hey, hello. I don't know if you hear me. Yeah.
Yes.
Hello. I'm probably the only non-academic person on this table, and in this room, I don't know. So I will try to give a little bit of a different perspective, being a journalist and also not being part of what they call Western Balkans, which I don't know why, but Bulgaria managed to somehow escape this label for some reason. I'll try to give a little bit of a different perspective on naming and probably on the colonies thing also. So naming, of course, is one way of recognizing something or just making it seem as something that you know or something that you at least can communicate with, because this is the first act of interacting with something. And I think, of course, Western Balkans is a term invented by the European Union, but I think in the case of Bulgaria and Romania, probably, after they joined the EU, there was this problem where the EU actually didn't know how to name them because they were in the Western Balkans. They were in the Eastern Balkans, obviously. They were part of the EU, but then again, they were not exactly part of the EU, you know? It's this in-between where, and as a journalist, I can tell you, as a journalist, you need to use shorthands for some things. You need shortcuts to people to understand. And the editors really love shortcuts. So the shortcut for Bulgaria in the European Union is the most corrupt country in the European Union, which is something that baffles me every time. Yeah, because baffles me every time. Because, for example, you don't shortcut Netherlands as the low-lying country in the western part of the continent, you know, or France, this big country between the two seas. You don't need those brandings for things you know. You don't brand other countries in the western part of the European Union as shortcuts, but you need shortcuts for Bulgaria and Romania. And this is part of the reason is that the Balkans, I think. First of all, the corruption, I agree, corruption is a very defining issue of this region. And so this is, in the eyes of the Westerners, this is like probably one of the most defining features. And it's an easy label. Western Balkans is another easy label, I think, which covers a lot of differences and covers a lot of different stories. And you need the easy labels because I assume as journalists, politicians also like to simplify things and to look at them as they are something that they know or something that they can easily interact with. Moving on to the colonies thing, which is, again, I think, related to the naming issue. The problem with the Balkans, in my understanding, is that they were never true colonies as the way other places were. And the reason I think for that is that the Balkans were really close. And that's the problem, because they're very close, they're not far away, they're very close, and you need to do something with them. For example, Bulgaria, as a part of the Ottoman Empire, it was not a colony because it was like in the middle of the most fertile ground next to Istanbul. It is not a colony, something that's very close to you. It couldn't be a colony in the same way. And so I think this is a problem with the Balkans perspective, with the Western perspective of the Balkans, is that they're very close. They you need to do something with them. You cannot keep them away, but they're very messy. They're very corrupt. They have a problem. So what do? You just try to slap labels on them, and that's an easy way. Also, and I think this is. This is the problem with, and I think we'll get into that a little bit later, but the problem with Romania and Bulgaria being in this no man's land in the European Union for the moment, because, for example, they're not allowed in Schengen, although they cover all the criteria, but they're not allowed in Schengen because they're in this in-between ground where
Croatia was.
And Croatia was invited because Croatia is closer, so in geographic terms, yeah, it's not in the Netherlands, but that's another thing, and I think this is very important for the Western Balkans, is that Bulgaria and Romania kind of ruined it for them. By being accepted in the European Union, because the European Union now doesn't know what to do with the other two countries from the Balkans that it received. So it kind of looks at the others like, well, we're not ready probably. So yeah, this is my perspective.
Thank you. Does anyone want to add something about coloniality?
I can add, but I want to say I knew it. It's Romania, Bulgaria, that ended up with Western Balkans. So I knew it. It's because it's always here fault of these two countries when we don't have any progress in EU integration. It's not our fault. It's there. It's your fault, right? And Hungary, right? No, for me, I just wanted to add a kind of follow up on that, because on this issue of coloniality, apparently geography is very important, which I kind of disagree. So Latin America and African countries, they can be colonies just because they are far away. And for example, Balkans cannot. And I think this is a common point that you are raising. I just kind of don't agree fully. Just being here and being kind of absorbed by these two empires, we kind of cannot claim to be former colonies. And I kind of think it's not really the case. So geographical factor is not the only one when we consider coloniality. And I think that comes also to this labeling. Now we have global north and global south. And apparently, now there are so many. So now there's apparently global east or global easts, right? So we just need to add global west, and then everything is kind of pointless, because I think the whole point of global north and global south is to kind of make a division with all criticism that comes to it, between privileged and not privileged. If we have global east, what are we? Half privileged, half unprivileged. So I think it's kind of, for me, this kind of geographical component doesn't really have any matter in saying whether we are colonial or post-colonial experience. I think for the Balkans, I think it is a colonial experience that we had in the past.
Also, because maybe you would like to answer my criticism. Yeah, just a short maybe clarification. In classical geopolitics, the way we have discussed about geopolitics for centuries, the classical way, you had geography creating politics, right? Geography defining politics. And in the end of the 80s and more strikingly in the 90s, we had critical geopolitics who put under question this view and practically just argued that you have politics defining geography. There is no such thing as geography. There is just constructed representation in certain contexts. This is a bit of a radical Foucaultian perspective, but at the same time, I think it's important for us to have in mind that apparently geographical labels are political constructs themselves. And in this case, what was said before about tribalism and ethnocentric particularism as being being a part of a definition of the Balkans and Balkanization as fragmentation, I would definitely connect this with Robert Kaplan, if you remember Balkan Ghosts. That was actually for me a clear Balkanist discourse and a confirmation of this actually Western construct, that is, the Balkans are the other of Europe. The Balkans are what we are not, right? And of course, there was a lot of critical thinking and criticism against Kaplan, who was describing the Balkans as this sort of barbaric space where there is a lot of chaos and Western actors will come and bring order. Well, 30 years later, I'm not sure what happened to this order, but I just wanted to say that I do not quite agree with this image of heterogeneity as being dysfunctional. I think this is a very dangerous argument because this is exactly what is used against Bosnia, Herzegovina, and Kosovo as multi-ethnic governance systems, with the nationalist argument saying, you see, it doesn't work. Multi-ethnicity, multi-ethnic governance doesn't work in the Balkans. And this is exactly what nationalists want to prove, right? So from this point of view, I would go back to the discussion yesterday and I would pose you a question. The peace protesters in Belgrade in the 90s, the peace protesters in Sarajevo in 1992, before the war started, were they Balkans or not? All the critical thinking that went against fragmentation in our region, they are not part of the Balkans. I would definitely say that there is no one periphery, there are multiple peripheries, as there is no one center, there are multiple centers. So from this critical understanding of geopolitics, we cannot accept the idea that, oh, because we have some nationalist politicians, then the Balkans are ethnocentric. I would definitely say this is exactly what the nationalist narratives have been promoting in order to put light on only one side that is very visible and that strategically uses ethno-nationalism. In my book on Bosnia and Herzegovina, I worked with two labels to discuss about elites in Bosnia and Herzegovina, saying that they are to the domestic, for their domestic electorates, they are ethnocrats. They all the time discuss about ethnicity as the main goal of any political deal. And when they talk with outside or with European Union or with donors, because they need the money, they are Eurocrats. But the same person being an ethnocrat and a Eurocrat in just a couple of probably minutes or hours shows you not only the schizophrenic element, but also the political instrumentalization as what we heard before, as Balkanization. Is that part of the real identity of the region? My argument is that it's not, and it's just instrumentalized in order to confirm the Western bias.
Okay. So we didn't discuss much this coloniality, but okay, we will move now to the discourses of Europeanization, which I think are very important, and then move to discourses of soft power. And we have a lot to discuss, so we will move. So we cited a lot Marija Todorova, and one also interesting quote from her book is that with the exception of the Turks, in whose self-identity the East occupies a definite, although intensely discussed place, all other Balkan nations have renounced what they perceive as East and think of themselves as if incompletely Western, certainly not Eastern. So definitely all Balkan countries are on the way to, or became part of the EU, or on the way to become part of EU. And but this negotiation or the accession of the Balkan countries to the EU became a space of collision of conflicting narratives about what Balkan is and what Europe is and where are the boundaries. And my question is how this mainstream Europeanization discourses affect the EU enlargement process and internal social and political relations within Balkan countries and between Balkan countries.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I have to apologize for being a political scientist, first of all. Political scientists are bound to see political outcomes and stick to political realism. That's why nobody likes me. But in general, that doesn't mean that I lose all hope for fighting another type of society or for supporting another type of society. I'm just claiming that We are not winning at this moment. And in order to win one day, you have to be quite aware that you're not winning at the moment. And ethno-corporativism wins over the citizens concept in every given outcome until now. So if you want to win one day, you have to ask yourself, where did I go wrong? Why we cannot sell this idea? Are we overselling? Are we underselling? Is it the structure of society? Is it sociological? Is it culture or whatever? So I have to stick to, be very shallow, in fact, not philosophically very deep. That doesn't mean that I support that kind of ethno-corporativistic logic, and I don't think that the battle is lost. But when you're losing a certain part of the battle, you have to admit that, and you have to see reality in society as it is. And sometimes it doesn't really help presenting as more beautiful than it is, because it's not. As to the EU and their discourse, well, you know, there is this transfer with psychiatrists that work along with their patients, if I can make such an impolite parallel. And I think that the EU didn't bring any transformative power to the Balkans. On the contrary, I think that the EU was contaminated by certain trends that come from the Balkans. I can tell you that the EU accession process of North Macedonia is a proof of that. As soon as you allow identity issues, which are bilateral, which are deeply irrational, which are irritant to all of the sides involved as formal criteria for advancement in the Euro integrative process, that's the moment when you become part of the problem, not part of the solution. And that's when you lose all leverage and pretty much lose all the power to transform societies. Let me tell you what the result is. 80% of the people in North Macedonia don't want to add the Bulgarian minority in the constitution, or in the preamble of the constitution, and one of the, as one of the peoples that would be mentioned in the constitution. 80% of the Bulgarians think that North Macedonia will not go to the EU, should not join the EU, until it fulfills all what Bulgaria asks, and it's very badly defined in the so-called Good Neighborly Agreement, which is a complete misnaming of an agreement. It couldn't be less of a Good Neighborly Agreement. It couldn't be less. It's the worst name for an agreement that has ever popped out. It created only problems. And the EU became a part of the problem by giving legitimation to this kind of discourses. The problem with Greece was completely different. The problem with Greece was much deeper. It was a security issue, irrational fear by Greece that Macedonia might claim part of the territory, and that there were some arguments. It had identity implications in the Prespa agreement, for instance. And you know what's the logic now? As my friend Zoran Nechev told to the European ambassador to North Macedonia, fool me once, it's your fault. Fool me twice, it's my fault. You cannot, the Prespa agreement, as soon as it was signed, I was defending it very, very, I would say, strongly. I said it's a one-timer, because it touches upon certain irrational categories such as identity, which are open to discussion. Now the Good Neighborly Agreement with Bulgaria opens up even more of this Pandora's box, which you can imagine how can that go in the further accession. So EU became a part of this diagnosis of, in the Balkans, did not really offer any transformative power in this regard. It has to do something in this regard. It's maybe just a reflection of the chaos that the EU is in, the need to reorganize, the need to reset its political structures, which will probably certainly end up in some kind of a discourse of most privileged countries, less privileged countries, and then us at the end of the tail of the European integration, which is again some kind of discrimination and power struggle, power play within the European continent. But still, this is even better than this limbo that the European Union is currently in. But my perception is that it really didn't offer anything in terms of both soft and hard leverage. It has no soft and hard leverage anymore, and the sovereignists win, unfortunately, and this is why they win. One of the reasons why they win. We can go deeper into this. I can elaborate more, but I think that I should probably give the floor to somebody that has more philosophical depth to explain the issue.
No, we will stick to the field, to the ground. So I will ask Ognyan. You know, these reports about so-called Balkan migration route, and then this European discourses about unwanted migrants from the Balkans. As a journalist, did you find them stigmatizing, offensive, and how did you identify them? Do you find something problematic in them?
I don't know. There are two ways of, are you talking about the legal migration from outside Europe, or are you talking about the legal migration from I think the problems with migration, especially, which basically started, European Union has never had a real problem with Balkans migration. Like, Balkan people were always well integrated in Western Europe. There was never a real problem with that. The real problem started when the waves of migrants from outside Europe started coming in 2015. This is when the populist discourse picked up. This is the famous Merkel, we can handle it, and so on, which led to the rise of many populist parties all along the route of the legal migration. And it's a totally different phenomenon, but also it allowed the European Union to actually fortify what it sees as an outside border, which is the Balkans, unfortunately, which is why one of the reasons Bulgaria and Romania are not allowed in Schengen, for example, is that Austria says we need a buffer between us and the illegal migration. Although, for example, the routes often cross Croatia, and they come through Croatia, but that's also a blind spot. So migration also plays into this very hypocritical game of trying to fortify the outside borders while keeping the core intact. I was thinking about what you said about Bulgaria and North Macedonia, and the problem. I think the problem it's an entirely made-up problem. It's an entirely problem of political speak. It wasn't because I was following the debates in Bulgaria. It wasn't a problem in 2019. There wasn't a thing as a veto in 2019. The veto came up as a political solution to an internal problem, and it was an entirely made-up problem that later on was transformed into a European problem. And it's
how it appeared as a problem when it was not.
So you had a small and vocal part of the political elite in Bulgaria, which was always claiming that there are problems with the rights of the Bulgarians in Macedonia. It was never a defining issue in the relationship. We have 4 commissions dealing with everything from history to, I don't know, you name it. There are like 4 separate commissions, communication and stuff like that. They were stuck at some point, but this was not a problem that we couldn't deal with, to say so. And we just escalated it on a bigger level because of internal gains. But that's a side point. And I was thinking about what you said of how did you frame it? What did the Balkan states want? They look more west than the east, and they construct themselves as Westerns. And I remember a very funny conversation we had with a friend of mine. He's a political scientist also, and we talked about. There are those annual happiness indexes. I don't know if you know them. In the annual happiness index, Bulgaria recently or always comes up as very unhappy. It's a mystery, by the way. The Economist once ran an article called "The Happy, the Unhappy in Bulgaria," because compared to the GDP level per capita, Bulgaria should be a lot happier than it is. So there must be something else, and there's lots of explanations for this thing. But one of the things we discussed, one of the things you do is you compare to others, and the happiness actually comes from comparing to other nations, people, you name it, like nations compared to nations, people compared to people. And for example, the television and the social media is a very powerful tool for comparing to others. And Bulgarians compare themselves to Germans, say, and that's a problem, because once, and if you switch the perspective, just think of it. This was what we discussed. If you switch the perspective, everything would be fine. And I will be very politically incorrect here, but Bulgaria thinks of itself as a less developed Germany. And that's a problem. But how about if we think of ourselves as a more developed Tunisia, say? Or that's a totally different concept. And suddenly you're like, well, we're far ahead. And that's the problem of perspective. And I think that's the problem everywhere in the Balkans. The Balkans compare themselves to nations which are running ahead, and they are very unhappy because they're not catching up. But this is not a race, I think. You need to run at your own pace, and then you need to do things as they come. And that was my point on this.
Thank you, but I think that Miruna wants to add something.
No, I just wanted to say that this is exactly the colonial feature, right? Of hierarchies and comparisons, right? Yep. And following a certain pattern. But I just wanted to add something with regard to Romania and Bulgaria being for the second time rejection to Schengen. The first time were in 2011, where we should have entered because all the technical criteria were fulfilled, but France was the one to oppose. And it's very interesting that now in Romania, there is a strong Eurosceptic feeling connected to Schengen, and especially because it was manipulated by populists, because from the Austrian veto, it just became EU hates us, we are not considered like them, EU failed Romania. So of course, this is a problem of oversimplification, and I would say that there is this danger also in critical thinking, especially leftist critical understanding of the EU, the risk of oversimplifying. I mean, what is exactly the EU, right? Who are we talking about? Also in terms of enlargement. Who decides about enlargement of the Western Balkans from the EU? We have multiple actors. EU is a postmodern construct, sui generis, as we say, there is no other like it, which means you have the Council, that is a sum of national interests that has the final decision, but then you have the Commission, which does the technical work, but also more and more political work, not just technical. You have the Parliament, that is now stronger than ever under the Treaty of Lisbon, and you have many other, let's say, non-formal actors that are influential in Brussels. So all of them influence in a way or another enlargement decisions. That is why a problem that was not on the agenda before, and the Bulgarian example was very good, suddenly came on the agenda. The same with Austria. Until now, the Netherlands were the main country to oppose Romania's entrance into Schengen for various reasons, but they connected it with anti-corruption. Now we don't have the mechanism of verification and coordination, which was the anti-corruption mechanism of evaluation of the European Commission. And Netherlands said, as long as there is this mechanism, we will oppose. Now this doesn't exist, so Netherlands had no other argument. And Austria just hijacked and suddenly vetoed. There was no diplomatic interaction between Romanian government and Austrian government that could have led to a possible no before the vote. So it was something extremely, let's say, mysterious how it all degenerated. And then it was simply connected to Austria having local elections and the Austrian politicians using this anti-immigrationist discourse for their local elections. So again, can we equivalate Austria with EU? Can we say that EU has failed on Romania and Bulgaria Schengen accession? I think in a way, this oversimplifying language is exactly what populists are proposing. But I would say if we want to take a constructive criticism out of this, then we should discuss about the decision-making, the need for a reform of the decision-making process in the European Union, which again is very complex because it means treaty change, which means 2 or 3 years of ratification in the parliaments of all member states. Is this what we want from the EU in times of war? To have a constitutional process that might end up like in 2005? So again, when we identify the problem, we propose a solution, but is this solution something that would actually benefit European citizens. That is why, in a way, I all the time try to be very careful when we talk about EU. The same with EU approach in the Western Balkans. I would say that there is a combination of approaches because EU doesn't have one voice. And that is the good news and the bad news at the same time. EU wants to have one voice in foreign policy. It doesn't. But from a critical perspective, I think it's great that it doesn't. I would be very scared of a European Commission that would be the single actor deciding on enlargement.
Thank you. You want to add something?
Sense on this as well. So I teach third year international relations students. So for the last 15 years, there is always one class when we talk about EU, what are kind of how young people see EU, whether Serbia should be part of the EU and stuff like that. So 15 years ago, when I would enter the classroom, if there's like 100 students in a classroom, 80% would be pro-European. Very strong feeling for different reasons, right? Now, when I enter the classroom, there's like 20 to 25 students who will be either openly EU or have kind of pro-EU sentiments. And of course, there are different reasons why this changed. Some people talk about Kosovo. Oh, first time we're mentioning Kosovo today, right? So, Kosovo, someone will be mentioned Russia, but most of the students, so these are social science students, right? They say they don't see this happening. So why wasting so much time on that? So it's not a kind of emotional, it's very for them rationalist approach. We don't see this happening anytime or anytime soon. We wasted so much time, so there is no real reason for us to do that. And this is what kind of frightens me. And of course, probably the responsibility bears on both sides. We talked about that. On our side, the Balkan countries and political elites for not doing their job, on EU for not delivering promises. We talked about that a lot. But for me, like what is the scariest part is actually for the young generation, there should be a driver of EU optimism. And for a generation of mine who will probably most be Euro optimists now became skeptical Euro optimists. I think that is a kind of a long-term effect that, I mean, process will probably at some point be restarted, policies will be created, recreated, but there is no really desire to become an EU. And I think that is the frightening thing, right? We talked about how the region is surrounding, but I think that is kind of the detrimental effect of the situation where we are now, that even people who believe this don't believe in this, if I can frame it like that. And I think that's the scary part.
Let us now move to another source of troubling discourses or trauma or whatever, soft power in the region, and in Klama, Russia's soft power. But the term actually emerged in the 90s with Joseph Nye books, and then he used it to refer to America's soft power, and so he said that there are three pillars on which soft power draws upon: this culture, political values, and foreign policy. And that America built its soft power on all these sources throughout the 20th century. But recently, more and more studies and more public discourses are discussing actually Russia's soft power, especially in our region, and especially after the invasion of Ukraine. So it is argued when discussing Russia's soft power, it is argued that Moscow obstructs Western efforts in the region using various soft power mechanisms, such as Orthodox Church, narrative of brotherhood of Orthodox people, anti-Western media linked to nationalist and right-wing populist parties, framing NATO as NATO aggressor, the EU as we heard now, institutional and politically weak, USA as destabilizing the colonial power, and all that amalgamated with homophobia, conspiracy theories, anti-gender discourses. So, how would you describe the character and impact of the Russian influence in your country, especially after the invasion of Ukraine?
Sorry, I'm a member of the Security Council. It's a professional deformation to speak about these things. And it's interesting that we start from North Macedonia. We spoke with Ognyan a little bit informally this morning about differences Serbia, Macedonia, and Bulgaria. Let me assure you that there is no authentic Russophobia or Russophilia in North Macedonia. No authentic. It's purely instrumental. Because there is no relation to Russia whatsoever. Let me quote your minister, the Serbian Minister of Foreign Affairs, when he was in Budapest a few months ago. There was this Open Balkans plus Hungary summit. I was there. It was Bujar Osmani, our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Olta Đačka, the Albanian former now Minister of Foreign Affairs, and there was Dačić. And Dačić says, okay, you're always accusing us of Russophilia, the Serbs. Let me tell you, in 1948, we broke off all relations, and we have no real relation to Russia, which can be debated. But in North Macedonia, it's definitely not authentic. The first point, not many generations were exposed to such, especially younger generations, and my generation, which is kind of somewhere in the middle, were not exposed to any kind of Russian cultural or any other references. Yes, I remember the cartoon Three Banana, and I remember Yesenin doing the homework in high school, and I do remember, but those references were far behind anything that could be labeled as a Western reference. So the influence of Russian literature, culture, ballet, whichever reference you might find, even politics, was far behind what the Western influence imposed or the way it was imposed in North Macedonia. So there is absolutely no authentic way to impose Russian influence. Is there a part of society that prefers Russia to other countries, to the West, so-called? Let's try to simplify a little bit. It's always dangerous to simplify, but we must. Yes, there is, and it's purely instrumental. Because there is anti-Westernism, there is not a pro-Russian sentiment in Macedonia. Because we need a counterpoint to the disappointing Euro integration process and to everything that was, and to this perception that we were let down by the West. And then we fall into Russian hands. But the highest that Russia was popular in our country was among 3% of the people. That was the peak after the French veto. After that, it dropped. Why it cannot, in terms of culture, it cannot penetrate. The biggest cultural reference in the last 30 years in Macedonia, probably when it comes to Russia, is Masha and Medo. That would be, I would guess, in the sole cultural reference. And it's a very benign cultural reference. Russia is not present. Russia was uninterested until it figured out that it can succeed. And it can succeed not because there is such amazement by Russia and Russian culture, because there are several elements that it can exploit. But it cannot exploit it directly. Why not through the church? Well, I spoke to the people in the church. They're my friends. Some of them are my friends. Some of the bishops in the church are very close friends of mine, and the former vice dean of the theology faculty. And I said, okay, Milan, why are you so silent on political issues? And he gave me the most logical answer. Listen, our church was just recognized by other Orthodox churches. So shut up. Keep it quiet. Don't rock the boat. We had so much trouble in being recognized by Russian, by the Greek Orthodox Church, by the Serbian, by the Bulgarian Orthodox Church. All this, we don't want to say anything. Just leave us alone. Let us enjoy the moment. Let us enjoy the moment. And no Russian, because there are two big divisions in the Macedonian Orthodox Church, the Ohrid Archbishoprics. It's a very complicated name. There is a pro-Russian strand or a pro-Russian current, and there is a pro-Greek current. But they are very quiet, both of them, because they want to enjoy the moment. Don't rock the boat. Let us get the Tomos, become part of the Orthodox world, and just shut up. Just keep it tight. So the church is no proxy for Russian influence. A bigger proxy is cultural conservatism. And that's where you're very right. Anti-vaxxing, HARP, conspiracy theories, anti-LGBTQI sentiment, anti-gender sentiment, authoritarian values. This is all a very fertile ground. And then you have the proxy, which is much more successful in North Macedonia, and it has everything to do with the Bulgarian veto, for instance, and it's called Srpski Svet. Yeah. Somebody yesterday, I think it was Mr. Pechanin, that mentioned that the idea of Srpski Svet is sold through the idea of open Balkans, and it probably is. Those two coincide heavily to some point. Who do you think, my question to you, who do you think is the most preferred country for ethnic Macedonians out of all countries in the world? There can be only one, especially after the Bulgarian veto. By the ethnic Albanians, it's of course Kosovo, Albania, and Turkey. But for the ethnic Macedonians, this was a research by the Prespa Institute. These are hard numbers. I'm not making this up, I swear. It's Serbia, of course. By 70–80% of ethnic Macedonians prefer Serbia more than any other country. And that used to be much lower before the Bulgarian veto. Because Serbia is seen as a counterpunct, as some kind of a balancing actor towards Bulgarian nationalism. And it has always been this schizophrenic division between orienting towards Bulgaria or towards Serbia. And Bulgaria made a huge mistake by pushing ethnic Macedonian public opinion into the hands of the Srpski Svet idea. But the Srpski Svet idea is the proxy towards Russian influence, and the most influential proxy. There is no authentic Russian influence unless there is Srpski Svet idea in North Macedonia, which tells you a lot about peripheries and semi-peripheries of whatever Wallerstein wrote about. So basically, if things in Serbia change, I think that North Macedonia will be left alone and confused who to believe. And this has everything to do with the first question of colonial mentality. We used to have Istanbul for several centuries. Then we looked up to Belgrade. Then we looked up to Brussels. And when it all failed, we again looked to Belgrade. It's time that we look to Skopje somehow. All the balancing between sovereignist and this international cosmopolitan idea is very hard. But Russian influence is purely instrumental, expresses anti-Westernism because of the failures of the Western idea to sell the idea of the EU, to gain transformative ground in the country, and as I previously said, becoming more part of the problem than of the solution. When that changes, then maybe we can rediscuss Russian influence in the region. For the other countries like Serbia and Bulgaria, I think that the situation is completely different.
Thank you so much for explaining this dangerousness of this construct of Srpski Svet, and I think it's very important. According to Eurobarometer surveys from May 2022 among the EU member states, Bulgarians are closest to Russia's view on the war. And your famous writer, Georgi Gospodinov, pointed out recently that one of the supporters of the nationalist party, Preporod, Vozraždanje, guest on a serious show, TV show, said that the only thing he would criticize Putin for is that he failed with the idea of a blitzkrieg in Ukraine. So Gospodinov argues that Bulgarian society is firstly divided, and for decades Bulgaria does not remember similar schism and divisions. And so what can you tell us? Can we say, and also can we say similar things about Romania?
Yeah, about Bulgaria and Russia. We unfortunately have a lot more to do with Russia than the ex-Yugoslav states, and this is a history that goes back a century or more, and it also, of course, the main entry point for all the influence that Russia has is the liberation of Bulgaria, which has always been presented as a gift to the Bulgarian people, and I think the way Russia is perceived in Bulgaria is formed very much so by the history books that children read in school. Because for 40 and more years, the role of Russia, the negative role of Russia in the beginning of the 20th century in Bulgaria was downplayed a lot. So you don't learn anything about it in school. It took me 20 years to understand what's going on. For example, there was a brilliant book by a German journalist that was in Bulgaria in 1885, when actually Bulgaria united. There were two Bulgarias after the Berlin Congress, and they reunited in 1885. And Russia was a staunch opposer of that, to the level where it actually sent killing troops to Bulgaria, the type that they now send to the UK or whatever to take care of the king that they put there. And this was never told in the Bulgarian history books, never. That's just something that's not there. So you get an overly positive image of Russia that's actually embedded in you, and it stays with you, and it actually forms your viewpoint. And this has been the case for quite some time. Of course, communism actually helped that, but it was never deconstructed later, so it's just continuing. And the thing is, there are, I think I remember throughout the years, several surveys, and I think the rough number is around 30% of the Bulgarians are very Russophile. And I'm saying Russophile as in they support the Russian, well, not only culture, but like viewpoint of the world. That's what I was saying. Now, the only time when this went sharply down was in the beginning of the Ukraine war. So support for Vladimir Putin, which was seen as the face of this new Russia, support for Vladimir Putin in Bulgaria dropped to under 15%, which was the lowest it would ever go. And now it's back up, and it's back up mainly due to severe propaganda. And when I'm saying severe propaganda, it's all guns blazing. Like, Bulgaria is a front state in this war, and in the war for minds and hearts, if you want. And it's a fertile ground for propaganda. And Возрождение, by the way, are playing very good on this card. I don't know if Возрождение are genuinely Russophilic, because in my opinion, as any other populist party, they're very loyal to themselves. But they are using the Russian card very wisely to inflame parts of the population. And yeah.
But what are their main arguments, if you can just briefly?
Well, it's, for example, they completely agree with the viewpoint of Russia that Ukraine is to blame for what's happening. They are sharing on their websites and Telegram groups constantly the viewpoints from the Russian media, the viewpoints from, say, Prigozhin, for example, was their star. They really liked Prigozhin, which was a real shock when what happened with Prigozhin actually happened. It was a real shock to the Telegram groups. So you get these distortions in the viewpoint. But and also, of course, the main topic is that Bulgaria shouldn't be allowed to go into war with Russia. Like, this is the main topic. So Bulgaria is very endangered of being pushed into war with Russia by NATO. Who is pushing us? Like, we are part of NATO. And this is like a viewpoint that actually hinders a lot of what you need to do in order to fortify your own defenses. For example, Bulgaria is suffering very badly economically in the Black Sea from the Russian blockade, because Russian blockade right now is basically making the Black Sea unusable for commercial purposes. And that's a huge vehicle for the Bulgarian business. And they are paying a lot of premium on insurances in order to use it, because Russia has virtually closed off the Black Sea. And none of this features in this viewpoint. Like, so that's the thing with Russia. It's always been overly glorified in the Bulgarian history, not entirely scrutinized, which is a problem. And as a result of this, you have a part of the population which is totally in love with it. Now, I'm not saying it's a bad thing to be in love with Russian culture and whatever, but you need to be at least objective about what's going on, which is not the case. And that's the problem. But it's very different to North Macedonia or to Serbia, for that example.
Maybe, I mean, I kind of agree and disagree, but maybe have more theoretical explanation. Why is that? No? Now? Yeah? Okay. So what you said...
Sing it.
Sing it, yeah. I need my guitar. What you said about soft power, right? So that's a kind of strategic. You project your values, your culture, your material culture as something that is desirable, right? Everybody wants to have an iPhone. Everybody wants to travel to New York. Americans doing a great job of projecting the soft power they have. Everybody follow American presidential election. So this is something that is present, but this is strategically placed all the time with culture diplomacy of the US. Europeans also try to do that more or less, I think, successfully. But what I noticed, maybe this kind of adds up to what you said, with Russia, at least that's kind of my interpretation. This is not really something that is strategically done by a Russia state, that they are planning, they are projecting these values. My impression, at least from my experience here, it's a more emotional, even a factual response of people who are here. So it's not that Russia is offering, it's more that they are accepting what is not even there. I had an experience of interviewing some of the returning fighters from a war in 2014 in Crimea, Serbians who went there, fight, and then came back, voluntary or involuntary, so that's disputable. The story why they went there, it's nothing to do with official Russian narrative. They have in their mind clash of civilization, fighting for Russian cause, Orthodox cause. So I have an impression that you can debate and argue against America's soft power because you can give arguments. You can explain why this is not good or why this is not true. It's very hard to debate with Russian because it's very on an emotional level and arguments just do not play any role into that. So I think it's not I think it's not soft power in a way how I described. It's a more kind of, if you can say it, emotional power.
I just say I totally agree with this. Most of the people that I spoke with, which are, say, Russophile to a large extent, are very emotionally so. So it's it's like trying to tell somebody why he shouldn't be in love. Like it's not something that you can argue with. Like it's not. He's just not listening to you anyway, because you are on a different level. Exactly. Logic works on this level, emotions works on this level. So Russia's very successful campaign was to actually present this as a civilizational battle where you need to choose a side, and once you choose a side, it's emotionally yours. You're invested. Yes, you invested in it. It doesn't matter if you like Russia as a culture. It doesn't matter if you want to live in Moscow. You see it as a rupture, and you're on the right side of the rupture. So this is the problem. And there's no logic that it can actually battle this, which is the problem with disinformation campaigns and all the tools that Europe is now financing to work with disinformation campaigns, is that they work on a different level. Trying to tell somebody that the facts are not there is just not enough. It's not going to work.
As Trump would say, alternative facts, right? So, yeah.
I also wanted to bring a bit of literature in the discussion. One of my favorite authors is the Nigerian writer Chimamanda Adichie, and she held a TED Talk, very famous TED Talk on 2009, where she talked about the danger of a single story. She referred definitely to the embedded racism of the colonial look towards Africa, but there she says the single story creates stereotypes, and the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. And I think in terms of Russia's role in our countries, Romania included, would be, again, an element of power relation and how much they are efficient in restricting access to alternative stories, to multiple stories, and promoting caricatures as reality. The West, as we see it in Russian narrative, is a caricature, right? It has some very, very exaggerated traits. Some of them are definitely true, and there's a lot of criticism, right? Anti-Western criticism that comes with facts that they are true. There was a lot of abuse in many behaviors, but that is not the only thing what the West is, right? So anti-Western narratives that Russia promotes are a caricature of the West. The same what I was also trying to say about what the Balkans are in the Western perspective. The Balkans, as being fragmented and so on, are a caricature of the reality. It's not the reality. And I would say, and maybe I'm a bit provocative here, but also, and this applies mainly to Romania, where there is no Russophilia. We are the most NATO enthusiast, Euro-Atlantic enthusiast, and Russophobic probably population around the area. There are a high level of trust in NATO and not trust in Russia, and even anti-Russian feeling in Romanian public. But at the same time, there is an image of Russia depicted as a caricature. Again, is that Russia? What is depicted in whatever this discourse promotes? It's also partially a caricature. So a caricature is one story considered as the only story, and that is what is problematic. And I think this is also the role of intellectuals, right? To make a distinction of why propaganda is efficient and why anti-propaganda is not efficient, because propaganda focuses on restricting access to multiple stories, multiple aspects of one reality, and focusing on promoting the caricature as reality. Whereas the anti-propaganda probably attempts, at least in the case of Romania, that could be successful would be to go beyond this and to show people that that is the caricature. The West, as depicted in the anti-Western rhetoric, is not the real West, right? It's just, and I would give an example at a personal level, right? It's like the bullying act, right? When you are in the schoolyard. For example, a person like me, I would be bullied because I am fat, right? So my entire personality would be equaled to the fact that I'm fat. Is it fake that I'm fat? No, it's true. I am fat, but somebody identifying me all the time and discussing about me and reducing me only to my weight is an element of bullying and is harmful. The same, I would say, is at the propaganda level, with focusing on one single story that becomes harmful.
Yes, you can add, but please be short because we have also other topics to discuss.
Okay. Yeah.
And the public, we should also.
Yeah, go ahead.
I had just a small intervention. The level of bias goes to the level of even cognitive resistance to facts. I was speaking to one of my friends that is, I would say, rather instrumentally Russophiliac, and he's always criticizing me in speaking about the Ukraino-Nazist, Ukro-Nazisti and whatnot. And I said, okay, listen, I'm not denying there is Desni sector, there is Bandera. Militant structures are always inspired by the Nazi idea everywhere, in Ukraine included. But so is Wagner. And he said, no, Wagner is pro-Russian. Russians fought the Nazis. And then Prigozhin's plane fell. And his right hand, Utkov, was suddenly a very popular guy that died with him. And what did Utkov have on his neck? He had the SS sign. And I sent the picture and I said, everybody's a Nazi, obviously, in this war. And he said, no, this is photoshopped. Cognitive resistance. On a cognitive level, you deny facts. Because the estimation is that around 50% of the Wagner groups has some kind of Nazi insignia on their bodies. The big Russian, fearsome unit that should be the inheritor to the Red Army that fought off the Nazis in the Second World War. So much for logical consistency. Schluss.
I will invite you to say something, and also invite you to tell us, because in comparison to all these countries, Serbia has some kind of special attitude to Russia, which is related to, guess what, Kosovo and Bosnia, and hopes like for redefinition of status of Kosovo or Bosnia. So Serbia really has soft power of Russia. Soft power in Serbia is effective, but when we spent some time together, Georgi told me some very interesting stories about different. Ognyan told me very interesting stories difference between relation to Russia between Serbia and Bulgaria. So it is based on historical experience, but it is so funny. I would really like if you can.
What that?
I think
he doesn't want to do that.
Okay, yeah, this was a different conversation, but I just noticed that the way Serbia and Bulgaria relate to Russia is very different because of the different experience that we have. And I compared Serbia's relations to Russia as something as a cyber love. You just love somebody because he's texting you or sexting you, and you just love it from a distance, while Bulgaria has been in bed with Russia. And that's a totally different way of knowing somebody. So that's a different level of experience, I would say. So that was my point on the difference between Serbia and Bulgaria and Russia.
And I think you got the point.
I have a question. So can we conclude that Serbia and Russia are friends with benefits, and Serbia and Bulgaria is the type of love, he beats me but he loves me?
I would say they're not even friends with benefits. They're just cyber love. They're like from a distance. Yeah, you know, you haven't been with the person, so you don't know. So, yeah.
Okay, let us now move to another topic, and what we termed here as Westplaining, and also local turn, a need for a local turn. So Westplaining was used as a pejorative term and represents mainly to criticize Western left. And the efforts of Western left is to explain intellectuals or people from Ukraine and other Eastern countries that what they wrongly understood, and how they maybe approach differently or criticize more NATO or something like that. But then there appeared articles arguing that actually all these countries really wanted to join NATO, sought for a membership, and that they do not need West to explain them what to do. On the other side, there is also another understanding of Westplaining close to what we discussed on Balkanistic discourse. So actually there are different types of Westplaining which we can criticize. And also in relation to Westplaining, there is talk about a really urgent need or need to have to turn to local expertise, to have a local turn, and to take agency back to the region. And so my question is, how do you understand this Westplaining, and how do you understand this need for a local turn? Do you think that it really can make a difference?
Okay. So I'm going to put my professor hat on now for just a moment, and then I will switch it back because nobody wants to listen for professor for a long time. So basically the talk is about peace and war. We didn't have chance so much to talk about peace in a sense that we do live in a post-conflict region, right? So the question is actually, how is peace built or kind of created again? And I mean, it has to do with Westplaining, right? So it's Professor Troncotă mentioned yesterday idea of democratic peace, right? Today, we generally see peace as state building. We need to create liberal states that are democratic states, because underlying idea is that democracy and spreading democracy around the world will bring peace. Although this is academic, it has been disproven in a sense that democracies do not fight between each other. They are very kind of warmongering when it comes to other countries, right? But the kind of underlying idea is like spreading democracy, meaning spreading peace. This especially came in the early 90s and early 2000s. So what is kind of peace creating, especially in this region and the others, is actually to create a liberal state. Because if you're peace prone and you have a liberal state, that will be a most peaceful state. The kind of the criticism of that is also that you cannot create the same state all around the world. Maybe it works for the Balkans, but it sure doesn't work for East Timor or for Angola. People in academic literature call this IKEA peace building. So the parts are always the same. You just need to go somewhere and assemble them by the instruction, right? And as I said, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And it has been heavily criticized by many people. I think Bosnia and Kosovo have been criticized. I mean, our colleague yesterday talked, but if you have an office of high representative, you cannot talk about democracy in one country when you have foreigner deciding on your behalf. And there are a lot of other criticism, right? So for us, coming from these peace studies, Westplaining would be mostly this kind of condescending attitude when it comes to they know outside better what it is for you when it comes to kind of creating peaceful societies. And then the reaction is what Marija said, the kind of local turn. that it's actually for people from the region to produce knowledge and to even produce peace dynamics that is kind of accustomed to the region itself. So peace in the Balkans should look very differently than peace in Rwanda or peace in East Timor. This is not a singular or universalistic vision. It's very different, right? It's individualistic, it's group, it's community, it really does depend. So I think that's a kind of, when we go back at the beginning of the panel and we start for decolonial, I think local turn is a way of kind of reclaiming knowledge production about your own region, right? So it's not only about outside. If you look at literature, Nenad probably knows as well as I, and literature about the Balkans for a long period has been generated by people from outside of the region, right? People who are maybe expert, but for sure some of them are not experts. Some of them were actually mentioned at Kaplan, right? This is just so travelers, right? So this is kind of the idea for us actually to have our own voice and to speak about that. And I mean, I have, if colleagues can show, can you show the website? Is that possible? We here at the Belgrade, we also created something that's called, can we do that? Or we? Yeah, okay. Well, I kind of ruined my moment now, so. We created something called Balkan Peace Index, and the whole idea is literally that. So, you know, like usually you have these kind of indexes, measurements that kind of rank countries across the world. Most of these people that rank countries never been in these countries. They don't even know where that country is, right? They sit somewhere in New York, London, doesn't matter, pull some data, and then they tell you where you sit. And like with labels, the ranks go the same. If they put you low enough, your politicians, policymakers do whatever it takes to go high up. They don't even know why they do it. They do it because someone told you that you're there. So Macedonians would try as much as they can to beat or reach Serbia or close enough to Serbia. Serbs would do the same with Croats. Croats would do the same to Slovenes. So you kind of enter into some kind of race without knowing actually why you're going to there. So we kind of try to kind of do in this spirit to the local term. There is now an index called Balkan Peace Index. If you kind of Google it, you can find it. And it's actually about local research and producing knowledge. So you can, there is much more downstairs, you cannot see that, but if you go to the website, you can see how actually people from the Balkans see our societies and how peaceful prone, conflict prone we are. So I kind of suggest that after you finish, or even now, you Google it and then you kind of bookmark this, and then when you go home, you can take a look. And I think this is the first one that we kind of try with the local term to try and kind of produce knowledge that is from the region for the region. So hopefully that will be kind of paradigm shift. Thank you.
Before I ask you some questions, if there is still time about this peace index, I would also like to ask you, what is Westplaining for you? For Bulgarians, for people from Bulgaria, Romania?
Because I would have to go in 20 minutes, I would, unfortunately, I will take up the answer and then I'll probably leave a contested place because I'll try to be the devil's advocate here. So I really also don't like what I suppose you call Westplaining, which is like people from, I don't know, Western Europe trying to explain how things work and how things should be. But I will say something scandalous here. The Balkans always think they're unique. They're not. What happened here happened everywhere. What happened here happened in various places in Europe. Various places in Europe were in war with one another throughout the centuries, and they managed to somehow achieve peace and managed somehow to achieve common unity together. So this idea that we have in the Balkans, that we are somewhat unique, that what happens here hasn't happened anywhere, and we're the only ones who know how to fix it. That's, in my opinion, a bit of overstatement. And I would actually think that this is still the best promise the European Union has, is the one of peace. And I would claim that it sounds a bit cliche, but it's true because it's a cliche. The European Union, for whatever happened around it, is still the place where wars don't break out. It's still the place where neighbors work out with each other, however much differences they have, throughout trade and peaceful means, which is not the case around the European Union, as we can see. So in times like this, I would argue that the peace is even more of a prize that the European Union has to offer, because the history it has allows it to claim the title of a land free of wars, you know? So this is something that I think the region should aspire for. And yes, of course, it's very awful to hear foreigners tell you how things should work. But in the same time, I also agree that a little bit less of a uniqueness, a little bit more of a trying to modesty and trying to work with one another and to each other would actually help us a lot more than we from time to time seem to think. This was my short contested place that I leave here.
But you cannot leave now. You have to stay.
No. I have 20 more minutes. So.
Do you want to add something to this Westplaining or local turn debate?
Yeah, first of all, and I think some of us discussed in the coffee break, it's a bit dangerous to use the concept in this context, in the moment of war, and especially focusing on war and peace, because it's a word and a concept that also plays a little bit with this caricature of the West, as I tried to argue. But nevertheless, I would go back a little bit to theory of international relations and to the Copenhagen School and Barry Bazin and Ollie Weaver, who defined the regional security complex. How can you identify a regional security complex? Different states that are more or less next to each other have the same friends and the same enemies. Right? So from this point of view, I could say that, yes, for the case of Romania and the NATO members from the Western Balkans, the West is Westplaining us in terms of security, particularly in the current war, because we have agreed voluntarily to define the same friends and the same enemies. And the countries that are still a bit schizophrenic about defining the friends and the enemies, especially in a situation of war, I think should put less the blame on the Westplaining, but rather to their own identity issues, right? So from my point of view, the leftist criticism on Westplaining is a slippery slope. In times of war, because this relativism and practically just criticizing that the West for telling you what should be your priorities, in this case, in terms of security, I would say it becomes a threat to your own security at the same time.
But maybe it depends on the war. I mean,
I have a podcast basically. So one of my guests said, this paternalistic Westplaining thing, he compared it to some kind of instrumental relation where there is a supply and there is a demand. Honestly, I think that the West has its own interests. They sometimes coincide and sometimes don't. However roughly this phrase, the West, sounds. And this guest of mine is a philosopher, has much more philosophical depth than I do, and said, listen, but in our case, in the case of North Macedonia, it's always the demand for Westplaining, or as he said, for these instrumental paternalistic relations that exists, not so much the supply. We always blame the supply if we look at it through commercial means. There is a demand. And I then remember that a few years ago I wrote something called a political dialogue in cooperation with the Konrad Adenauer Foundation and the Institute for Democracy, together with a colleague of mine, Misha Popović. And me and Misha figured out, and we did an analysis of all the political crises in Macedonia, North Macedonia, whatever you call it, in the last 30 years, ever since the independence and the first big crisis in 1994. And the units of analysis were the 94 crisis, 2001 conflict, the 2004 territorial organization, 2007 May agreement, Pershing 1 and 2 processes and whatnot. They are not important for you. The common conclusion was that out of no single crisis we have exited without asking the help of the US and the EU. Not once have we exited a political crisis without the so-called, with the infamous leaders' meetings, which is kind of avatarization of the politics and tribalization of politics, where the US and the EU comes and the leaders of the political parties come and they completely circumvent the parliament and any political process and says, this is the solution. And then we speak about Westplaining. As Ognyan said, let's be more modest. There is a demand in our country for this. Unfortunately, we have completely forgot to own the political process. Serbia is the other bitter end. Too sovereignist with our own heads, Jokic, Djokovic, us. Resistance towards the foreigners is the other radical end of the story, and it's very proud of it. Okay. I don't find it problematic. I just find it different than North Macedonia. But North Macedonia is on the opposite. We completely forgot to own the political process, not because of Westplaining, but because of our own deficits. Let's stop blaming for every single deficit we have the West, the East, Russia. There is simple structural deficit in the political process in Macedonia. And the West has helped more than once to exit this type of crisis. Was it elegant help? No, it wasn't. Was there a better version of the help? No, there wasn't. Can we do it on our own? I hope that one day we can do it on our own. So we're still toddlers. We are still toddlers in this political sense. We forgot to own the political process. Let's try to own the political process, maybe not go full Serbian, I would say, but let's at least try to meet halfway.
Don't go back to Balkanistic discourse, please.
Yeah.
So, infantilization of the Balkans.
No.
Yes.
Yes. Well, okay, we disagree. This is always like a dilemma, is this insiders, which we started with that. Should we also consider outsiders view as a superior or inferior, or insiders view, or combine both? And I think that a combination of both, like insider and outsider view, is the best for us. But okay, it is really important for us to claim back our agency and to also insist on our local knowledge, on our local expertise. So I was impressed when Nemanja showed me this peace index. And there are a lot of parameters for measuring the quality, infrastructure, and dynamics of peace. So, and there are also some interesting parameters like negative peace, positive peace, then measuring a relation of corruption to peace, measuring a rate of criminality to peace, then what else? State capacity and so on. So what your peace index, you wrote that it is the first peace index in the world that is locally produced and owned by locals. And can you summarize briefly what your peace index showed or revealed about the Balkans, the current state of affairs in relation to peace in the Balkans? Can it be short or?
No, but that's first. It's shameless self-promotion, right? First, locally owned, right?
Okay, but I really think, why not? It is like one good product. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it kind of, people who kind of Google it and look at it, it's going to see, but it kind of shows that as we talk, I think yesterday and today, that we kind of sometimes are too pessimistic about the situation in our region. It kind of, pessimism kind of revolves maybe because of our everyday problems and struggles and a lack of progress in certain area. But if you look at a region that 25 years ago had like a conflict that took 140,000 casualties, the biggest one after the Second World War, I think like the region is doing quite well. I mean, with all the problems, it actually shows that these kind of societies are much more peace-prone than conflict-prone. And I think this is probably, in a very nutshell, what the index is showing is actually that there is a lot of potential for cooperation, but also there is a lot of what we call infrastructures for peace. So there is resilience that we often forget, and we kind of lean on a negative and a pessimist message. But I think actually what kind of everyday reality shows us that there is actually what we call conflict disruption and actually a lot of preconditions for peace. And we don't see, how do we say, we don't see tree from the wood, right? So I think it actually shows that. It's actually showing that these states are not in bad shape at all.
Okay. Thank you so much, and I will now open the floor for your questions, and we will collect first round of questions, and then second maybe, and I think that will be it. And Alexandra will, I think, yes, but where is microphone?
Let's have a mic.
You can say. You can say.
I hope it's on. I take the opportunity to ask the first question because it also involves Ogi, so perhaps you have a minute to, or are you leaving?
Unfortunately, I have to, but we'll wait for your question.
No.
But first, fast.
Yeah.
We will gossip you.
It's about the Russian influence in the region, and Nenad talked about that there are no real Russophile movements or even representatives in North Macedonia, but you talked about proxies. So where are the entry points for such Russian influence? And you talked about cultural conservatism as one of those. And this goes in the direction that goes way beyond Ogi's emotional argument that you cannot convince someone who is in love with someone not to be in love with that person. But the cultural conservatism argument of yours, Nenad, is a content. It's ideology, it's a conviction, which means gender issues in all its different aspects, women's rights, family values, abuse, LGBTQI plus issues. And these are all on the cultural conservative side. You have similar issues on the leftist side, which was addressed yesterday, perhaps with a fierce and very anti-Americanism, which with a very long tradition. This is also not about, you know, crazy emotional things. It's ideologically based. So this is my question: that are we seeing now the beginning of this Russian influence that will perhaps have a bright future?
Just before Ogi answers, I really have to, it's urgent, leave you in 2 minutes when Miruna will moderate.
Yes, before I leave, I'm just a quick take on this. I think that because I've been following for quite some time Russian information war and the way they construct those, and I think they very wisely managed to construct a single story out of very different stories. The whole range of issues that you mentioned are sensitive to one group or another in a different way, but there was never a single explanation story, and the Russians very wisely managed to weave it all together and to present it as some sort of a civilizational battle, which is not, because this is our different issues in different levels in different societies, and they fight different battles. But presenting it whole as some sort of a us versus them helps them a lot. And I think this will take ages to deconstruct and to actually help. And I'm really sorry that I need to leave, but
okay.
yeah.
Thank you very much. Have a safe trip. We will take other questions, or you want to answer to address it now?
Whichever you prefer. I can just shortly.
Yeah, please.
This social conservatism is there to stay. And when I, among other things, inspect and analyze political culture, it's a course that I also teach as an elective course, political culture. And you will see that there is a huge proclivity and predisposition in our societies in the region for this kind of behavior. I made an analysis of political education unrelated to our debate, and yet related somehow. And I said, okay, there is this general table in a study which is like proclivity to conspiracy theories. And I said, okay, I called the author, he's a friend of mine, can you give me the cross tabs with age groups? I want to see how it goes by age. I shouldn't have done that. because I got very disappointed. Our youth, with all the access it has to the internet, with all the education it has, with all the possibilities there is in front of them, is more prone to believing in conspiracy theories, like HARP, anti-vaccine, powerful families controlling the earth, whatever, chemtrails, you name it, we've got it. Then the median generation, my generation of people, and it's close to the older generation. So there is kind of like a graph. And it tells me that what you said is probably true. I think that this social conservatism is here to stay. And there are two strategies. You can try to oppose it, or you can try to make a plural society and kind of adapt it, which is very hard. And always have in your mind the mindset that one part of society will be conservative and you cannot really change it. It's very hard. It's like a walnut, you know, that you cannot break, because it's resistant, even, as I said, to cognitive knowledge, to cognitive facts. It's resistant, exactly because it's emotions, and it's mostly, and it's always, in our case, and probably in the region, covered in the veil of one very vague term, which is also something that we didn't mention too often, tradition, which for me personally is not the correct term to use, but it's always conveyed in this concept of tradition, traditional values. We never had gay people in our history, we were always straight, and those same people love Alexander the Great. And when you tell them that we erected a 22-meter monument to the most famous bisexual person in history, they get mad. And that's a historical fact. I'm not making this up as well. This is a historical fact. And social conservatism is a very good connecting point of Russian propaganda. Don't forget, let's be completely honest, it also co-opts the American conservatives. And very well. So it's not bound to Russia. It's not bound to Russia. It's bound to a general conservative sentiment that goes across territories, across states, across borders, I would say. And I don't think we can effectively fight it. Maybe we shouldn't. We should try to adapt and discuss with that part of society. That's my logic, because the more you push, the more resistance comes out of there. So I don't know. I don't think that we are doing right, that we are doing really a favor to society and we are pushing too much, because then the reaction is even more radical from the other end. Maybe we should try to discuss a bit more, in a bit more tender manner, softer manner, and incrementally over time. Change is not gonna happen anytime soon in terms of some kind of social revolution of values.
Let us now collect questions, like 3-4 questions, and then answers.
Yeah. Just a few small remarks which might also ask for comment. Well, I first want to correct Nenad of saying that there is no Russian influence in Macedonian reality, which is not correct. At this moment, we have parliamentarian party, which is absolutely pro-Russian. And then, of course, until we are doing with our conceptualization, analysis, and research, the things changes. So it also reflects to other things in society. So people, of course, one theory is that they're always like walnuts, but on the other hand is that people are very much changing their orientation, so that, let's say, if 20 years ago the pensioners, the retired person, were the most, Yugo-nostalgic, pro-communist, now they're actually the bearers and the core group for conspiracies from nationalistic and pro-Russian sentiments. So, and then another thing which is important, and yes, you were referring to the post-colonial situation, but now we faced a very often postmodern situation when in the orientation everything goes, and then you also have proxies in the orientation, which means that now this party, which is called left in North Macedonia, but it's having radical nationalistic stance. On that, they are also now adopting you know, communist fundamentalism. So they went to the grave of Enver Hoxha and they paid homage, respect. So that nowadays, no one actually knows their platform. It's only a follow-up of steps, but they are attractive because they are anti-everything. So they are anti-everything. So they assemblage everyone that is unsatisfied on any level, so that it also happens in the mainstream politics. You might not be satisfied of the level of corruption, or you are not satisfied of too much compromises with the neighbors of the EU, but then all of a sudden you find yourself supporting party which is becoming pro-Russian or illiberal or authoritarian and things like that. So yes, it is becoming so much complicated in today's realities, and we really need to conceptualize and not to speak to design policies and actions which find such resistance.
It becomes unpredictable, but Nemanja argues that it can be predicted.
Yeah, thank you. I would also like to offer a very brief comment on the actually origins of the current Russian system of propaganda. We shouldn't forget that it's a relatively new thing. And then during the 90s, Russia was not actually systematically, effectively waging their information operations in the West as the Soviet Union did. We should trace this system back to 2008, when one of the prominent military leaders actually said that we won the war against Georgia in terms of military, and we completely lost the information war. So we were not able to convince anybody, even ourselves, that this war was justified. And since 2008 only, where they introduced the systematical approach, okay, Russia Today was reintroduced on a larger scale and so. So from the very beginning, the system was planned to be the informational warfare system. It's omnivorous system, which really sucks every potential conflict, every potential topic. And if you will go around the world, you will see, okay, in the former Soviet republics, it targets the Russian-speaking population, playing on the, national sentiments. In Latin America, it plays with anti-Americanism. In Italy, it plays with something else. So it's really omnivorous system, and I really think that they have a sort of a register of potential conflictuous situation, and they explore every possibility to incite the hatred, to ignite the split. Thank you.
Is there more comments?
I have an observation in 15 seconds and a concrete question in 5, so 20 seconds. Palestinians and Jews have lived together for a long time, know each other very well and dislike each other. Serbs and Albanians in Kosovo know each other very well and dislike each other. There are about 300,000 ethnic Serbs in Austria and about 3,000 ethnic Serbs in Russia, and yet Russia is much more popular than Austria. Question: do people form their affinities, likes and dislikes, on the basis of factual knowledge or on some other basis? Are there studies where surveys are made? Well, here are 20 factual questions about the country, and now what do you think about it? Is there a study of relationship between factual knowledge and affinities?
One more question and then answers.
Thank you. My question would be more to Miruna and Nemanja.
We don't hear.
No?
Oh, yes. Or?
Yeah.
No, yeah.
So my question is probably more to Miruna and Nemanja potentially. And I wanted to bring in, because it was discussed because of the structure of the talk, also more in binaries. First the influence of the EU, then the influence of Russia, but of course lived, it's both at the same time. And so I wanted to bring in the decolonial Russian scholar Madina Tlostanova, who describes this experience as a Janus-faced empires, especially with Serbia and Russia, right? And also a lot of the criticism that has been done to a part of decolonial scholarship, which sometimes, with that local turn, we tend to also romanticize a lot of the local knowledge, and there is a lack of critical self-reflection. So my question would be, do you see that risk here? And also, what is to come back also to the role of Russia, the instrumentalization is probably also because it helps the self-victimization of a certain part, and therefore erases the own types of abuse conducted to neighbors, but also to minorities in certain contexts.
So I will stop here. So we had actually 2 comments and 2 questions, but maybe you would like to also to respond to some comments, but you answer in turn which you choose.
Okay, thank you both for the comments and the question. Maybe this also adds up to what we continuously discussed these days. Definitely in the Western decolonization trend should be perceived or should not be perceived as an example for doing the same in the Western Balkans, maybe for the same reason as the IKEA peace building, right? You need to adapt to the more complex and very different realities in the region. The same goes for saying, well, the Balkans were not in the same way, right, colonized. We're not properly a colony, and not to the extent as it happened in other regions. So the entire decolonial attempt should also respect that reality. So from this point of view, I definitely agree that especially the leftist critical approach towards the West and towards this sort of abusive colonial behavior against the Western Balkans should be scrutinized in a self-critical way, because in the context of a war, I think the result is much more dangerous, right? I mean, practically this criticism of Western decisions or Western actions towards the Western Balkans or the EU per se can easily be manipulated, oversimplified, and instrumentalized without that being the intention, right? Of course, maybe some intellectuals have that intention for various reasons, but I think we need to separate a little bit the roles. I mean, I personally would not feel comfortable, no matter how critical I would be on certain whatever decision-making processes or elements of how EU works, to feed up into Eurosceptic behavior and my words to be used or abused in order to target anti-Western or anti-EU feeling, especially in a context of war. I think a context of war is an exceptional status, let's say maybe almost state of emergency, if we can call it like that. So I think this calls for more self-reflection and more intellectual responsibility. So from this point of view, I also agree with this element of it's very comfortable for Russia to feed up into the self-victimization narrative in the Western Balkans and to use blame shifting, right? It's very comfortable to say that everything goes wrong because of the EU, right? We haven't finished the reforms. We are not in the EU because the EU doesn't want us, right? This is also very comfortable. And in a way, it reproduces the blame shifting that the EU itself also puts on local politicians, even though stabilitocracy is also a result of how EU opted to conduct the process, right? So trading off democracy for stability. I think this, the fact that in a way, I would compare it, and this is my last thought connected to this self-victimization, with going into therapy, right? A person goes into therapy, and the first phase of acknowledging its own problems is fury, is rage, right? But I think there is a difference between people who express that rage guided by a therapist and people who process that rage, unfortunately projecting it on others and being very harmful. I think this should be the distinction between the way we become self-reflecting and aware of our relation with the West and the problematic aspects, and the way this can be ideologically misused against our own interest.
Okay. Yeah, I can comment on that, and I have a comment that completely is not related to anything you said, but just to use this opportunity, because for me it's striking how much we actually talked about Russia these 2 days. Right? It was maybe it was the way how organizers kind of organized the workshop, right? But I think talking from Serbian perspective, especially since the war in Ukraine started, Russia is now like a regional power. It's not big power anymore. It's not a country that has influence in international relations it had before, and it's not going to have it for a long period of time because it dragged itself in a war that it cannot get out. For Serbia, I think it's quite clear that Serbia's main strategic partner would be China. It's not something, it's not EU anymore for our stabilitocracy. It's not Russia, it's China, because China has the same what Russia has. It has a veto power in UN, which is kind of, how do you call this? Holy Grail for Serbs, right? So, and you see, Russia, China also has something that Russia doesn't. It has money, it has invested. The highest investment per capita in Europe is Chinese, it's actually in Serbia, it's nowhere else, it's not German, it's not. So it's also influence. It doesn't have soft power, but it tried to have since COVID and everything, but it somehow we kind of stayed, all of us, including me, we stayed in the realm of Russia, while I think it kind of reminds me of what Andrea said, the Janus face. Maybe this Janus face has 3 faces, not 2. And I think maybe not for all countries, but for Serbia, I think China is definitely someone that has more info. I mean, you see that talking with policymakers and people who are making strategic decisions, it's actually China, it's not Russia. It's going to be, and of course, it's not only Serbia. If you talk in America, nobody really cares about Europe or Russia. They all care about China. War in Ukraine is just a distraction from China in the long run. But this is kind of observation that I had from these 2 days. On romanticizing the locals, you're right. There are always people saying you should not romanticize the local, you should not romanticize the local. This is what everybody say. For example, in Afghanistan, is it good to have Talibans? Probably yes or not, because they give you security that Americans never could. But do we want to have a repressive regime that doesn't allow women to go out, to help work? Of course we don't want, right? To mutilate women, to people beat to death. This is also local. So this is something, if we go fully local, that will mean embracing this. And this is, I'm sure, that we don't want. I mean, human life, human rights, gender equality, this is probably something that we all want. But to be honest, it's never only local or top-down. I think it's always some kind of hybridity, right? I think the question is to find a measure where both sides kind of influence, but that would be kind of most appropriate for the country and the region, right? Somewhere top-down approaches would maybe be more, have more sense than bottom-up, kind of be compensated, somewhere other way around, but I think it's never one or another. I think it's always a combination of 2. It's just a question of finding a right balance of 2. So do not romanticize, but also do not fully kind of go against the importance of local.
Nenad, would you like to comment on comment?
Yes, just short. When it comes to attitude formation, of course, the attitudes have 3 components. They have cognitive components, what we know about something, an emotional component, how we feel about it, and something that's called, sometimes it's called in social psychology a moral component or a connotative component. It depends. Those 2 are different, but how we feel whether it's something is moral or not, and what are we ready to do about something. There are issues that trigger us more easily. The problem with how political culture is structured in the Balkans and the whole debate, not just in the Balkans, I think it's a global problem, is that sometimes emotional part of the attitude compensates for the cognitive part. It overtakes the cognitive part. We don't even feel the need to know something about something as soon as we have strong emotions about it. So we defend it with strong emotions instead of knowing something. It's sometimes this emotional component of attitudes has a compensatory effect, unfortunately. And this is how echo bubbles are created on social networks, and this is how people avoid constructive conflict, and this is how people don't want to accept that there is another worldview outside of theirs, because they emotionally defend it. They start to emotionally defend it.
But where do emotions come from?
They don't come always from cognitive processes. That's what I was trying to prove for the whole duration of this workshop. Sometimes they simply come from prejudice, stereotypes, wrong impressions, half information, misinformation, malinformation, you name it.
Trauma, personal
trauma.
Or historical experience.
But we can be cognitively resistant when we want to. We do want. Ukrainians are Nazis, Russians are not. Half of Wagner has Nazi insignia. No, they don't. It's a Photoshop. Okay, it's a Photoshop. Have it your way. Then again, I just want to make another point. Why there is a very certain specific mindset in the Balkan, and it's interesting for analyzing political science, and it was mentioned in between lines, and it has to do everything with the legacy of the non-aligned movement. The non-aligned movement was a blessing as much as it is a problem now. Why? Because there is one very important psychological consequence, especially in Serbia, it's very popular, and in Macedonia as well. We outsmarted everybody for 50 years. We were smarter than everybody. It has the feeling of hegemony and dominance over everybody. And we should continue doing that. We shouldn't take sides, because at the end of the day, we will outsmart everybody. And that's Ognyan left, unfortunately. We should be more modest. We will not outsmart everybody. We are a book that has been read. Stop thinking that we will outsmart everybody, and this has something to do with a popular folk figure in Macedonian folklore called Itar Peo, the cunning Peo, cunning Peter. The guy that will outsmart everybody by the virtue of a balancing act. This is psychologically detrimental, harmful to the collective psychology of Macedonians. For the Serbs, I cannot comment. For the Serbs, I cannot comment. But this is very harmful for the Macedonian, I would say, essence and existence. The impression that we are smarter than everybody, that we will outsmart everybody, and by the virtue of a balance again between the East and the West, we will simply come on top as winners. We won't. Everybody hates me because I'm saying this in Macedonia, or people that are more prone to mythomania, I would say, dislike me pretty much, and I'm so proud of that. I'm so proud of that. Because we won't come on top. We won't be the smartest persons. There are smarter people than us, and as Ognyan said, whatever happened here already happened somewhere else. Let's not believe in this type of almost borderline eugenics, that we're kind of a selected race that will be the smartest on the exceptionalism. Yes, exceptionalism. Thank you.
Are there more questions? Okay. If not, then I think that we had a great panel. We can close this panel with, I will say that we discussed a lot of topics, and started from Balkanism to discussing European discourses on Europeanization. We also discussed the components of soft power, and especially Russia's soft power, Westplaining, and the need for local turn also. And I think there are also a lot of other things to discuss, but this panel of ours is good introduction into next panel on pacifism, and I invite you to join us also next panel, but also we can now go outside and have a coffee and cookie and relax a little bit. Thank you.
And thank you.